Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Hey everybody, Dan Kent here with Osheta Moore. This is another MuseCast. Osheta, I take it for granted. I take it for granted that Shawna usually kind of hosts this, and I just think, well, that's her job is easy, but it's not. This is hard. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing here.
Yeah, well, but Shawna is so good. Like, this is Shawna's like superpower. She makes really hard things look really easy. And so, like, when you were like, I'll host, I was like, oh, Lord bless you, because I was prepared to step in. But yeah, Shawna is recuperating from her second vaccine dose. So yay, Shawna, take care. But
yeah, definitely.
Now you're stepping in, hosting.
That's right, and I can empathize with Shawna also, because I got my Johnson & Johnson on Saturday, and that really threw me. I mean, I was not expecting that. So, are you fully dosed?
Yeah. So right before I took that trip down south with the SOMA students, it was Tuesday that I got my second Pfizer, and I had blocked out the whole next day to do nothing. I was like, I'm going to be out for the count. I will rest these and I actually felt really fine until like that Wednesday night. And then it was like every night for the next maybe 4 days from like 3 to 10, I had fevers and chills and aches. Like, it was like on clockwork. It was so weird. So everybody, like TC, my husband, got the Johnson & Johnson. He was out for the count for like a good 24 to 36 hours. But for me, it was like a lingering kind of thing, which is so, like, our bodies are weird.
Yeah, I agree. Well, so this weekend we had you as our sermon giver, as our pastor, and you gave a really great sermon on oaths. And you mentioned in the sermon that it's not one of the texts that you see on T-shirts and posters and bumper stickers. It's not really the most exciting passage, but in my mind, a lot of times it's those passages that you end up finding the most important things. And I think this is another good example of that. And so I would love to hear your instead of me doing the summary, I would like to we're switching everything up. So I'd love to hear you do the summary this week.
Yeah. Okay, Dan. Well, thanks. So, no, you're totally right. So I was in Matthew 5:33 through 37, where I just picked up where Greg left off. Kind of, we're in the change of heart, kind of like the series within the series, right? So, and Greg talked about adultery, and so then I picked up with the next like set of warnings that Jesus gives us on oaths. And when I was studying it, so I was like, what am I going to say about oaths? We don't run around here and say like we don't offer oaths, and we don't say like, I swear to whatever. Lots of us even try not to say like I swear to God or whatever, because that's just been worked out of our language. And so I was like, I don't even know how to get, like, I don't want to talk about contracts. I didn't know. But then I was looking at kind of all of those passages that are like leading up to oath and then going forward, because we're going to spend some time in eye for an eye coming up. And what I noticed was there's this phrase that Jesus kept using, which I actually really love. Like, I was asked once on a podcast, what's my favorite sayings from Jesus? And my favorite saying from Jesus is, you have heard it said, but I say to you. And I explained in that podcast, the reason I love it is because Jesus, when he does that, he is exposing the ways that I am used to thinking and inviting me into a new, creative, often countercultural way of living and being, which is very kingdom. And so when I saw that that was what's going on with the like two like warnings ahead of oaths and then going forward, Jesus was still kind of using that, Paul, he says, like rhetorical phrase. I was like, this is third way. This is like so Anabaptist, which is this like new kind of alternative way of engaging with a problem or an idea, but doesn't choose a side, but creates a whole different, like just kind of like takes it out of those boxes and puts it in a whole kind of different expansive way of viewing something, so it doesn't get locked into either or thinking, but like this yes and thinking maybe. And so then when I saw that, I was like, okay, so I'm going to pull a Greg and do like 2 mini sermons where I kind of outline what is third way and what it's not, and how we see that in the life of Jesus and his ministry. And then now if we have this filter, how do we view this section on oaths, where Jesus is asking us to not get pulled into an either or sort of thinking, but like this new expansive way of thinking. And then when it kind of took me out of that, of like, oh, I can choose, I don't have to choose like oaths, not oaths, but like integrity and this way of being, that's where the sermon landed is, I tell the story about how my husband asked our son to think about integrity as an act of love, integrity as investing in relationships, as opposed to just preserving your reputation. And so then we explored that for the rest of our time. So after I kind of helped us understand what third way is a little bit, I mean, there are classes on this, but, and then I asked us, let's have a third way framework for what we say and do, and how we live in this world. And then I end with teaching on the beloved community, which for me is a reflection of a third way kind of community and way of being with each other. So yeah, that was the sermon.
Yeah, it was great. And also thank you, Tyson, for, providing the story to start the sermon off.
I know. I asked him last week, because here at Woodland, we're such a supportive teaching team. So we meet together and we talk about the upcoming sermon. And when we were talking, I thought of that story, but I was like, oh, I have to get Tyson's, because it's like a really big story. So I asked him, he's 18 now. So he was 8 when it happened. There's 10 years past. It's like, can I tell the story? And he was like, sure. But it was funny, Dan, because that afternoon, Sunday afternoon, he came downstairs and he's like, what did you say on the stage? And I was like, why? And he was like, I'm getting texts from my friends at Woodland. Like, you love Pokemon cards, huh? I was like, oh, well,
yeah,
everything is copy. Everything is sermon material.
That's right. That's right. And that's where, the whole family shares the burden. It's part of your ministry. He's part of your ministry. So
that is his unique offering to this ministry.
That's right. Well, you know what? There's so many things that I want to talk about the sermon. Well, like, where should I start? Well, the first one that I just love, the first thing that I really, in fact, I'm going to be doing a sermon on Matthew 5:48. If we ever get there, it might be in 2024 by the time we get there, but I'm going to be doing Matthew 5:48, and I'm going to be tapping into a similar kind of theme that you tapped into, which is this social element of virtue. This idea that it's not like we're trying to be good boys and good girls for the sake of being good boys and good girls. It's because we love one another and we want to be loving toward one another. And the way that you framed it with Tyson and his ability to see that, it really beautifully captures this. And so I love that, especially that really, like, a lot of the teachings of Jesus, if we were the only person on the face of the earth, it wouldn't really matter at all.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have to worry about any of these things. It's really, how do we live with one another? Let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's only important because of others. It's not about me personally. It's about us. And I just think that's beautiful. The other thing that you mentioned, and it wasn't really a main part of your message, but it really taps into something that I feel right now, and correct me if you disagree with this, but I really feel like how we discuss issues, we're starting to scrutinize that, and for good reason, because we're so polarized and we've got a lot of hostility and a lot of animosity right now in the culture. And so people are starting to explore, how are we looking at issues? And one of the things that people are looking at is, centrism versus extremism, and people who are compromising and both siding is another phrase that I've heard. And then here we come offering a third way. And so I'm curious, how do you distinguish like a third way approach from something like both siding?
Yeah. So when I look at third way, and when I look at like how Walter Wink talks about third way, when I read other theologians or other pastors, particularly like Anabaptist pastors, wrestle with the concept of third way, what I notice consistently is that third way is not a middle way or compromised way. So like I said on the stage, it's not taking a little bit of these ideas and taking a little bit of these ideas and like mixing it together in this gumbo of like this new thing and then being like, here you go. What I've noticed is that third way is a completely different way of dealing with the issue at hand that holds both the impact and the intention of that of the issue in tension with each other. And it's rooted in two main goals, love of God and love of other. So when I am trying to conceptualize a third way, it's like, say if I'm having a conversation with somebody about racism, okay? So both sides kind of response would be, well, I mean, I can understand why some white people would believe that white people are, better. Like I can understand that. But I also feel like there is value in honoring the life and dignity of people of color. Like, actually, that's not a really helpful way of approaching that conversation, because inherently in this idea is division. Actually, this idea, this like white people are better than others, doesn't love God because it doesn't honor the Imago Dei, the image of God in all people, and it doesn't love your neighbor. So what I do when I have this so if I'm going to have a third way conversation, what I said from the stage is I hold love of God and love of neighbor. Like these are my two kind of things that I'm rooting my approach in. Then I have like sort of three kind of checks that I go through in my mind to make sure that I am actually engaging in an alternative new way that actually brings both sides into the conversation, but not saying one side, which has like some dangerous ideas, is valid. Yeah. Because when I have a conversation with somebody around race, I'm not going to validate white supremacy. It doesn't matter how much I honor the image of God in that person, believe that they're beloved and want to live in relationship with them. I'm not going to honor that kind of conversation. Yeah. But I will honor that person and saying, I can understand how you can get to that place. Let's talk about why those ideas are unhelpful. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the three things that I say that I hold and that are essential for me in forming a third way is the image of God, remembering we're all made in the image of God, because that reminds me that God is involved in this whole process, and it keeps me humble, that we're all broken, that makes me rely on the grace of God and offering grace to each other, and that we're beloved. So that's kind of how I deal with it. And also, like, here's what I want to say about third way, because I think a lot of people are like, that feels so hard to do. And it is. And that is why we need the Holy Spirit. And so this is why I think the story that I told about Jesus and the men who are caught holding stones is that there was an element of the Spirit at work that de-escalated that conflict, that took it out of an either or conversation in a both and in this, like, we're having a completely different conversation about humanizing all of us involved here, not condone or condemn. Does that make sense? So we need the Spirit. Yeah. We need the Spirit to do this.
No, that's good. Well, a couple responses to that. First of all, I agree. It's like, it's not like you're trying to find a third way between justice or injustice. It's like, no. We're all against injustice. There's no balance. There's no balance between justice and injustice. That's not an appropriate place for a third way. The third way comes from, I think, when you look at two broken things in the world, and there must be another solution. And and so what I've often found is that and I think confident humility, that's sort of, that's the mentality I took in writing that. I felt like the church historically has offered something that doesn't work, and the world offers the opposite, which also doesn't work. And so I'm hoping for a third way, and praise God, I think Jesus provides it in Matthew, in his teaching in Matthew. And so to me, that's really helpful. And, when I was in seminary, Osheta, it was so maddening, for me, because like, I want to find like something that there's good reason to think it's true. And sometimes like when you're in seminary, you'll hear, two opposite ideas, like God's control and human freedom. And so many times, we'll try to figure out, well, how could God be in control if humans are free? And I can guarantee I would like count down in my head, 10, 9, 8, 7, and someone would raise their hand. It's a balance. they would say. They would just run and say, it's a balance. It's a balance. It's like, no, it's not a balance. These are, you can't have a balance between racism and not racism. It's one or the other. I mean, you can't, you might have less racism, but racism is racism.
Right.
And so like a third way is different than balance. It's different than compromising. And I think that's so important.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons why Greg's work in leadership at Woodland about the picture of God that we have, like a Jesus looking picture, like that is a third way response to a lot of particularly what you're talking about. God, like, why do bad things happen in the world, and how can God still be good, or how is God still in control? Like, Greg takes us back to like the root of the issue of like, what is our picture of God? And like, let's talk about that picture of God, and then let's filter all of these questions through our picture of God. Well, that's a third way approach: love of God, love of neighbor, right? So I think we have precedent, and we built practices around Woodland in doing that. And part of the reason why I wrote Dear White Peacemakers was I just took that framework and said, okay, how do I deal with anti-racism through that framework? So, yeah.
Well, and speaking of which, and you apply this idea really to, okay, now what do we do with this personally? I mean, we have our image of God for sure, but how does that then affect how I view others? What's my image of others? And and so really these three components, that I'm an image bearer, and that they are an image bearer, that I am broken, and so here's that plank in my own eye concept that we've been talking about, and that I am beloved and so are they. I just think that's such a fundamental way of being Christ-like in the world. And you really do capture that in Dear White Peacemakers. And we weren't going to promote your book, so this is just this just happened. I swear. But I tell you, you really do capture that. Well, like when I was reading Dear White Peacemakers, I really felt like that you really did believe that even people who are not open to the idea of racism and social injustice and stuff like that, you did view them as beloved. And as a white person reading that book, it filled me with hope. And and so I just think that that's a testament to the power of living from these three kind of nodes, that I am an image bearer and so are they, and I am broken, but I am beloved and they are beloved, and just maintaining that in front of us at all times, I think should fill us with hope and should bring great healing. And I just think it's so wise.
Thanks. I mean, I honestly, like, for me, the most challenging teaching from Jesus is what we're going to be cracking into soon about love of enemy. And for me, honestly, like I have to have these three nodes if I'm going to choose a nonviolent enemy love posture. I just have to. And so that's why I applied it to our text on oaths, because I feel like when we break our oaths to each other, when we're hypocritical, it's an act of violence. It's a relational violence. And I shared the story about how, like, I know so many 20-somethings, 30-somethings who have deconstructed themselves, and so they still like feel like they appreciate Jesus, but they have no desire to be a part of a faith community at all. And it's because there has been relational violence because of our lack of keeping oaths, if you want to use the language from the scripture. So this actually has like real time, meaning and impact. If we can become people who view our words and thoughts and actions and deeds and engage, like if we can view ourselves as people who are moving through the world with these three nodes as an act of loving our neighbor well and loving God, I think that this can heal a lot of relational brokenness that has been caused because of, different ways that the church has compromised on love of God and love of neighbor.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really interesting way to think of the oath keeping as really sort of, I don't know, like you're baby stepping toward more violence. It is sort of kind of not subversive, but like almost like subliminal violence. It's, because like applying these nodes here, it's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it takes a lot more strength and confidence in these nodes as we go on to getting slapped in the face by our enemy. And so that's a really good point. And I'm glad that you introduced this here, because I will, when Greg or whoever does the sermons on the Turn the Other Cheek, I will be thinking of these nodes, and I appreciate that.
Well, thanks, Dan.
I remember when I was a kid, I don't remember specifics, but I know I used this, like, Mom, if you buy me this game, I promise I will get A's on all my classes this fall. Like, give me the reward now, and I promise I will do the work later. And I don't know how this fits into everything, but it just struck me that, because, what I guess this is what I was thinking of. Why is it that we have a hard time just letting our yes be yes and our no be no? And like in day-to-day life, I mean, you talked about the violence of it. I can think of, like, the first thing that comes to mind are kids that are sexually abused in churches. That's where like, whoever is in authority there, they made an oath, even if it wasn't like an explicit oath, they made an oath that they would be shepherds and they would represent God, and they violated that oath. And like, and you look at like how much sexual immorality takes place in leadership in churches, and it's almost as if, it almost feels as if like people who have the desire to do these wrong things go to the church because they view that as an opportunity. And I don't know, I'm kind of talking all over the place here, but well, I'm wondering like what all that has to do with like oaths and integrity, like, and how that relates to church. Well,
so to answer your first question, for me, what I think is the problem with just letting our yes be yes and our no be no is we don't believe ourselves. Like we don't. And I'm just speaking from experience. Sometimes I overcompensate when I say I'm going to do something, because I don't really believe that I have the capacity or the time or the desire to do that. And so I'm almost trying to talk myself into it the more I'm telling the other person, like, yes, I will, I promise I will be there 30 minutes ahead of time, like whatever. And so
that's a really good point. I've totally done that.
Yeah.
Totally done that.
It's almost like, it's like you're selling yourself on the thing you're trying to, dupe the other person into. And I think oftentimes it's not coming from a malicious place. Like I talked about, like culturally, that's kind of just what people did. And it wasn't like it was a malicious thing, like, oh, I'm moving through the world trying to cheat people. It's just, there was no way of proving to each other, like, your word. And so when there's this piece of like, I don't even know if I can do it, but if I say that I can do it and I can say it this way, then maybe I will, talk myself into doing it. And I think that's why Jesus is saying, like, your yes be yes and your no be no. And he prefaced all of this with like a reminder of who God is and who we are to God, like having a humble view of ourselves, because I think that is often why we cannot just let our yes be yes and our no be no, because we have an over exaggerated view of our capacity or our ability or our desire. So I think that, to answer that, the other question, the piece about, because I've been thinking a lot about this too, of like leadership's exploitation of loopholes. I think a lot about the Pharisees, like the culture that the Pharisees had of like exploiting these loopholes by like presenting themselves as holy or as mindful of God when they're not really, like they're just focused in on their own desires or preferences. And so I think that when I see something like this happen, like an exploitation of a loophole like that they've duped us, and their oath, like that I believe that I follow Jesus, that I'm committed to the church, that I will take care of these children, or like their oath is not matching their lifestyle. And so I think that's the other piece of Jesus being like, God made like the great city, which is God's throne, like saying like, be mindful of God, like you're being seen by a God who will judge you and who is aware of what's going on in your heart. So
Well, and it's that's interesting. I was just reading in John 3, and he kind of makes this point. Let's see if I have it here. No, I don't have it here. I think it's in John 3 where he tells I can't remember if he tells John the Baptist or if he tells Nicodemus that do everything. Realize that everything you do is done in God's sight, and it just kind of like. I guess there's multiple ways to look at it, but it's all an integrity issue. And I'm going down a total rabbit trail here. I apologize. we didn't, this is wasn't on the agenda, but I think it's important because, and there's a lot of complexity to it for sure. And I'm just wondering how this applies, but I do think that as leaders, even as volunteers or whatever, we're all in this process of trying to become something that we're not yet. We're trying to become more Christ-like, and I think that's a good thing. But I think you should also be aware of your brokenness, like you said in the note, and you should always live from that perspective. Don't live in this place that you're not there yet. And I wonder if a lot of times we kind of try to convince ourselves and those around us that we're something that we're not yet, and it's so easy to do that because people want leaders to be more righteous than they are, and people want leaders to be more holy than they might be, and so there's a lot of pressure for leaders, even volunteers, to be something that they're not, and they get affirmation for pretending to be more holy than they are. And so I think that there's an opportunity here also to just kind of say part of oath keeping, part of integrity and letting your yes be yes and your no be no also means letting yourself be where you really are and getting more in touch with where you're really at, so that you don't get into a place where you have more say so and more power than maybe you should have. And
no. I'm like, you're preaching good. Like, no. And I think too, the other thing that I would say, and we always end here with the MuseCast, we always kind of circle back to this but beloved community, like I ended the message with the concept of the beloved community, not just belovedness, because that can be such an individualistic thing. So if I am a leader and I know that I'm not making good choices, or I'm neglecting my call to shepherd and love people well in whatever way that it could be, I can have a very individualistic view of like, well, I'm loved by God. God sees me. It's like God forgives me. But like when we take that and expand it out to beloved community, so this idea of that we are a community of people who own our belovedness, who proclaim each other's belovedness, and who protects the belovedness of those in this world. Like when we make those our kind of three goals as beloved community, then even though I'm a leader and I'm loved by God and I know I'm making a mistake and he's forgiven me and I still have a responsibility to work that out in community, to go to another beloved and say, this is what I'm doing and this is where I'm failing. And then they can say, you're still beloved, but now we've got to do some work so that we can protect and proclaim the belovedness of those God has put under our charge,
Yeah. Man, that's great. Hey, so we're out of time, but thanks for humoring me as I totally took us way off course. But
I love it.
Good. Well, hey, thanks everybody for watching, and we will see everybody next week on next week's edition of the MuseCast. So, bye, Osheta.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.